Hello, and welcome back to another video, Sherlock Holmes and the Murder of Dr. John Watson. Please consider giving us a like, and let's get started. Chapter 1, The Sudden Loss. The crisp morning air hung still over 221B Baker Street, where the faint clatter of hooves on cobblestones filtered through the windows. Sherlock Holmes sat in his usual chair, a sheet of notes in his lap, and his pipe resting idly in his hand. The detective's mind was elsewhere, his sharp features betraying the concentration of a man deeply entrenched in thought. Dr. John Watson had left early that morning for his usual rounds. Holmes had heard the faint click of the door and Watson's cheerful farewell, which he acknowledged with little more than a grunt. Their friendship was built on such routines, mutual respect for one another's independence, punctuated by moments of shared purpose. It was nearing noon when the tranquility of the day was broken. A sharp, hurried knock echoed from the door below, followed by the familiar shuffle of Mrs. Hudson's steps. Moments later, the door to the sitting room burst open, and Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face ashen. "Mr. Holmes," she gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "Inspector Lestrade, he's downstairs. There's dreadful news. It's Dr. Watson." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and his pipe clattered onto the table. He stood abruptly, his voice steady but laced with a cold urgency. "What has happened?" Mrs. Hudson's voice faltered. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, he's been found dead." The word struck like a blow, but Holmes's expression remained impassive, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the back of his chair. "Where?" he demanded, his tone sharp and clipped. "Near Hyde Park, sir," she whispered. "Inspector Lestrade will explain." Holmes grabbed his coat and hat with mechanical precision, his movements swift and deliberate. "Send him up immediately. Mrs. Hudson, fetch a cab," he said as he strode toward the door. Lestrade entered moments later, his usually brash demeanor subdued. "Holmes," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I'm sorry to bring this news. A man matching Dr. Watson's description was found early this morning near the Serpentine in Hyde Park. The scene, well, it's grim." Holmes's eyes bore into Lestrade's. "Matching his description, you are not certain?" Lestrade hesitated. "The clothing, his belongings, it all points to Watson, but you should see for yourself." Without another word, Holmes swept past Lestrade and descended the stairs, the inspector following closely behind. The cab ride to Hyde Park was silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of wheels on stone. Holmes sat rigid, his piercing gaze fixed ahead, his mind already whirring through possibilities, unwilling to accept the worst without evidence. At the edge of the park, a small group of constables stood in a tight circle, keeping back curious onlookers. The scene was eerily quiet, the usual hum of the park muted by the gravity of the discovery. Holmes stepped out of the cab, his long strides carrying him past the constables, to where the body lay, covered by a white sheet. Lestrade gestured for the constables to step aside. "I thought it best to leave things as they were until you arrived." Holmes crouched by the body, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the surroundings before he touched the sheet. With a steady hand he pulled it back, revealing a man in a familiar overcoat and scarf. Blood had pooled beneath him, staining the grass, and a cane lay discarded nearby. For a moment, Holmes did not move. His keen eyes took in the scene with detached precision, but his clenched jaw betrayed the turmoil beneath. Finally he spoke, his voice cold and analytical. "Where is his revolver?" he asked. Lestrade blinked. "Revolver? Watson always carries one. If this was a robbery, where is it?" Holmes's tone was sharp, his mind beginning to piece together the incongruities. He inspected the body further, noting the angle of the wound and the blood pattern. The strike was deliberate, precise. This was no random attack. Holmes reached for a crumpled note lying near the body. He unfolded it carefully, his sharp eyes scanning the hastily scrawled words. "A man's strength is no match for inevitability." He handed the note to Lestrade, his lips pressed into a thin line. "This was left to mislead us. Whoever staged this wants us to believe it was impulsive." Lestrade frowned. "Staged? What are you saying, Holmes?" "I'm saying," Holmes said, his voice low and taut, "that this was premeditated. Someone wanted Watson dead, or wanted us to believe he was dead, and went to great lengths to ensure it." Standing, Holmes cast one last look at the body. "I'll need access to the autopsy report immediately, and I want to question anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual in the park last night." Lestrade nodded. "Of course. Anything else? Yes. Holmes's voice grew softer, more introspective. Ensure his belongings are handled carefully. Nothing must be overlooked. As the body was taken away, Holmes stood alone near the Serpentine, his silhouette sharp against the pale morning sky. The park seemed vast and empty, its beauty marred by the weight of the scene. Holmes's fists clenched at his sides as he gazed into the distance. "I will find who did this, Watson," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "and I will make them pay." Without another word, he turned and walked away, the beginnings of a plan already forming in his brilliant but haunted mind. Chapter 2: Threads of Deception. Back at 221 Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat alone in the dimly lit sitting room, his sharp features illuminated by the soft glow of the fire. The events at Hyde Park weighed heavily on him, an unrelenting shadow hanging over his usually composed demeanor. The note found near the body and the deliberate nature of the crime replayed in his mind like a puzzle demanding resolution. Mrs. Hudson timidly entered, carrying a tray with a fresh pot of tea. "Mr. Holmes, you've barely touched your breakfast. Perhaps some tea will help." Holmes glanced at her, but said nothing, his mind elsewhere. He leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mrs. Hudson," he said finally, his voice low and distant, "when Watson left this morning, did he say anything unusual? Mention any appointments, places he planned to visit?" Mrs. Hudson set the tray down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Not that I recall, sir. He was his usual cheerful self, just said he had some errands to run and would be back for lunch." Holmes nodded absently, dismissing her with a small gesture. Once alone, he turned his attention to the map of London spread across the table. He marked Hyde Park with a red circle, adding notes about the location of the body, the direction of the drag marks, and the possible time of death. The puzzle wasn't fitting together. Not yet. By midday, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Inspector Lestrade entered, carrying a folder of reports. His expression was grim but determined. "St. Bartholomew's just sent over their preliminary findings. Thought you'd want to see this." Holmes took the folder and began reading with practiced speed. The medical examiner had confirmed Holmes's suspicions. The body was not Watson's. The victim, a man of similar build and complexion, had been dressed in Watson's clothes and posed to create the illusion of his identity. The clean wound indicated precision, likely from a trained professional. Cause of death was a single incision to the neck, Lestrade said, summarizing the report. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Holmes closed the folder and leaned back, his mind racing. This was not just a murder. It was a message, calculated, methodical. Someone went to great lengths to make me believe Watson is dead. The question is why? Lestrade frowned. "You think this is personal? Someone targeting you?" "Unquestionably," Holmes replied. "Watson was the means to an end. By removing him, or making it appear so, they sought to destabilize me, to disrupt my focus. It's a tactic meant to cloud my judgment." Lestrade nodded slowly. "So, where do we start?" Holmes stood abruptly, pacing the room as he spoke. The note found at the scene, it was hastily written but deliberate. The wording suggests inevitability, a taunt meant to unnerve me. The body, carefully posed and moved, indicates a level of planning that eliminates common criminals. This was the work of someone with resources, knowledge, and motive. He stopped at the window, staring out at the foggy street below. "We begin by tracing Watson's movements this morning. He had errands to run," Mrs. Hudson said. "I want to know where he went, who he spoke to, and if anyone saw anything unusual. Additionally, we must identify the victim. Whoever he was, his role in this deception is critical to understanding its purpose." Lestrade scribbled notes as Holmes spoke. "And a revolver?" "You mentioned Watson always carries one." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "The absence of his revolver suggests he was caught unawares, likely by someone he trusted or did not perceive as a threat. That narrows the field significantly." Lestrade stood, ready to act. "I'll put my men on it. We'll canvass the area near Hyde Park and trace Watson's movements. You'll be the first to know if we find anything." As Lestrade left, Holmes sank back into his chair. Drummond stood beside him, scanning the maps. "Holmes, this is clearly a trap. She's luring you out, isolating you." "Of course, Watson," Holmes replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "But traps, when anticipated, can be turned against their makers. La Dame Rouge wants a meeting, and I intend to oblige her. Lestrade frowned, his arms crossed. You're not seriously going alone, Holmes. That's exactly what she wants. Holmes turned, his expression firm. I have no intention of giving her what she wants, Lestrade, but to outmaneuver her, I must appear to play her game. The group devised a plan. While Holmes would go to Chateau de Rouge as instructed, Watson, Lestrade, and Dupont would position themselves nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. The chateau, located deep in the French countryside, was isolated, a perfect setting for the confrontation La Dame Rouge had orchestrated. The following evening, Holmes arrived at the Chateau de Rouge, its imposing red stone walls glowing faintly under the moonlight. The structure was an architectural marvel, with Gothic spires and intricately carved gargoyles that seemed to leer down at him. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Holmes approached the heavy iron gates, which creaked open as if on cue. A shadowy figure emerged, a tall man dressed in a black suit, his face obscured by a mask. Without a word, he gestured for Holmes to follow. Inside, the chateau was eerily beautiful. Crimson tapestries adorned the walls, and a massive chandelier cast flickering light across the marble floor. Holmes's escort led him to a grand drawing room, where a figure sat poised in a high-backed chair, her face hidden by the dim light and a delicate lace veil. La Dame Rouge, I presume, Holmes said, his voice calm but probing. The woman rose gracefully, stepping into the light. She was striking, her crimson gown flowing like liquid fire, her piercing green eyes fixed on Holmes with a mix of amusement and challenge. Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice smooth and commanding, you've impressed me. Few men would come here knowing the risks. Holmes inclined his head slightly. Few men are as curious as I. She smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. Curiosity can be a dangerous trait, but I suspect you thrive on danger. Holmes's sharp eyes flicked to her hands, noting the faint scar on her left palm, and the way she toyed with a small dagger. You've gone to great lengths to orchestrate this game, he said. Kidnapping Watson, staging his death, all of it designed to provoke me. Why? Her smile faded. Because you're a threat, Holmes. To men like me, powerful men who operate in the shadows. My associates feared your interference, but I saw an opportunity to test you, to see if you could be broken. Holmes stepped closer, his voice colder now. And yet, here I stand. Your test has failed. Her expression hardened, but there was a flicker of admiration in her eyes. You're right. You're resilient, Mr. Holmes, but everyone has a breaking point. At that moment, the doors burst open, and several armed men stormed in, their pistols trained on Holmes. La Dame Rouge's smile returned, this time laced with triumph. You should have brought reinforcements. Holmes remained unfazed. Who says I didn't? Before she could react, a loud crash echoed through the chateau. Watson, Lestrade, and Dupont burst in from a hidden passage, their weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as Lestrade's men engaged the guards, and Dupont apprehended the masked man who had escorted Holmes. In the commotion, La Dame Rouge attempted to slip away, but Holmes was faster. He cornered her near a hidden staircase, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. The game is over, madame. She laughed softly, her composure unshaken. For now, perhaps, but this is only the beginning. Before Holmes could restrain her, she pulled a concealed lever, and the floor beneath her gave way, plunging her into the darkness below. Holmes rushed to the edge, but the trapdoor had sealed, leaving no trace of her. As the dust settled, Watson approached Holmes, his revolver still in hand. She escaped, he said, his tone heavy with frustration. Holmes nodded, his expression thoughtful. For now. But she's left enough behind for us to dismantle her network. This was not a victory for her. Lestrade joined them, holding the confiscated documents. These will keep us busy for months, but do you think she'll resurface? Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. Undoubtedly. La Dame Rouge is too ambitious to disappear entirely, but next time we'll be ready. As they left the chateau, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The game with La Dame Rouge had ended, but Holmes knew another would begin. For now, though, he took solace in Watson's presence by his side, their partnership unbroken despite the trials they had faced. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The return to London was quieter than expected. The chateau's dark secrets, captured in a trove of documents and evidence, had revealed the breadth of La Dame Rouge's network. Though she had escaped, the foundations of her operation were shaken, and her associates would soon face justice. For Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, however, the journey home was a time for reflection. Back at 221B Baker Street, the familiar scent of tobacco and the comforting crackle of the fireplace greeted them. Holmes stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the morning light, his expression distant as he watched the city begin its day. Watson, now fully recovered, sat in his chair, observing his friend with concern. "She got away, Holmes," Watson finally said, breaking the silence. "And yet, you seem not at peace, but less troubled than I expected." Holmes turned slightly, his sharp eyes meeting Watson's. "Because, my dear Watson, she left behind more than she intended. Her escape was calculated, but it came at a cost. The documents we recovered detail her operations, her contacts, her financial movements. We may not have her, but we have her empire in our grasp." Watson nodded, though his brow furrowed. "Do you think she'll strike again? Try to rebuild?" Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. "Oh, undoubtedly. But La Dame Rouge made one critical error. She underestimated the resilience of those she sought to manipulate. She believed breaking our partnership would destabilize me. Instead, it strengthened my resolve." Watson leaned back in his chair, the weight of the past days finally lifting. "And what of Hawthorne and his ilk? They'll face justice, I presume?" "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Lestrade will see to that. Hawthorne and his accomplices are the first dominoes in a long chain. Each name we uncover will lead us closer to dismantling her network entirely." The room fell into a comfortable silence as Holmes retrieved his violin, drawing the bow across the strings in a slow, mournful melody. Watson watched him, recognizing the tune as one Holmes often played when his mind was restless but his spirit was steady. After a while, Watson spoke again. "Holmes, I must ask, what drove her to such lengths? She could have simply eliminated me, yet she chose a more elaborate path. Why?" Holmes paused, lowering the violin. "Power, Watson. Control. For someone like La Dame Rouge, the game is not merely about victory, it's about the artistry of it. By orchestrating your disappearance and staging your death, she sought to demonstrate her superiority, to prove that even I could be manipulated." Watson frowned. "But she failed." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Precisely. And failure, for someone like her, is intolerable. She'll resurface, Watson. People like her always do, and when she does, we'll be ready." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face bright despite the early hour. "Inspector Lestrade is downstairs, Mr. Holmes. Says he's got news." Holmes set his violin aside and gestured for Watson to follow. In the sitting room, Lestrade stood with a satisfied expression, holding a thick folder. "We've already started raiding her contacts," he said, placing the folder on the table. "A few of them are talking. If she thought she could hide, she was mistaken." Holmes flipped through the pages, his sharp mind quickly cataloguing the information. "Excellent work, Lestrade. This will accelerate the process." "And the messenger?" Lestrade smirked. "Singing like a canary. Turns out he didn't much enjoy being left behind when she fled." Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. "Her own men will be her undoing." Lestrade nodded, tipping his hat. "I'll leave you to it then. Just thought you'd like to know we've made progress." As Lestrade departed, Watson poured 2 cups of tea, handing one to Holmes. "Do you think we'll ever catch her?" Holmes took the cup, his expression thoughtful. "One does not catch a storm, Watson. One prepares for it. La Dame Rouge is a formidable adversary, but she is not invincible. Her desire for control will be her undoing." Watson raised his cup in a small toast. "To the next case, then." Holmes raised his in return, a rare warmth in his gaze. "To the next case and the enduring strength of partnership." As the morning light filled the room, the two men sat in quiet companionship. The game with La Dame Rouge was far from over, but for now they had won an important battle. Together they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their bond unbroken by the trials they had endured. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they were ready to meet them, side by side. Both cautious and concerned. "He's alive then?" Holmes nodded. "Barely. Whoever orchestrated this went to great lengths to ensure Watson was removed from the equation without taking his life. It's a deliberate choice, which suggests they have further plans." A medic from Lestrade's team stepped forward to examine Watson, carefully checking his pulse and lifting his eyelids. "He's been sedated, likely with a strong opiate. He'll recover, but it may take some time for him to wake." Holmes's eyes darkened. "Time is a luxury we cannot afford." In the adjoining room, Jonathan Hawthorne was handcuffed to a chair, his face bruised from the struggle. Holmes wasted no time in confronting him. "Hawthorne," he began, his voice cold and cutting, "you orchestrated this elaborate charade, the staged murder, the abduction. Who hired you?" Hawthorne smirked, though his defiance was undermined by the flicker of fear in his eyes. "You think I'd tell you? I'm no fool, Holmes." Holmes leaned in, his piercing gaze unrelenting. "You're a pawn in this game, Hawthorne, and pawns are always sacrificed. Your employer will discard you the moment you are no longer useful. Speak now, and you may yet save yourself." Hawthorne hesitated, his bravado faltering. "I was paid to take the doctor," he admitted grudgingly. "Didn't ask questions, just followed orders." "Who gave the orders?" Holmes pressed. "A messenger," Hawthorne replied, his voice low. "Anonymous. Came with money and instructions. The body in Hyde Park. That was their idea. They wanted you to think Watson was dead." Holmes straightened, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "And where were you to take Watson after this warehouse?" "I wasn't told," Hawthorne said quickly. "Once I handed him over to the men here, my part was done." Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. "Conveniently vague," he muttered. "But you've given me enough to work with." Returning to Watson's side, Holmes felt a flicker of unease. This plot was larger than a simple kidnapping. It was a precise, calculated move to destabilize him. Watson's removal was only a piece of the puzzle. The mastermind behind this operation was still hidden, their motives shrouded in darkness. As the hours passed, Watson began to stir. His fingers twitched, and his eyelids fluttered. Holmes leaned closer, his voice calm but urgent. "Watson, can you hear me?" Watson's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as recognition dawned. "Holmes," he croaked, his voice hoarse. What happened?" Holmes placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You were abducted, drugged, but you're safe now." Watson struggled to sit up, his brow furrowing. "I remember leaving the apothecary. There was a man waiting. He called out to me as if he knew me. Then, darkness." Holmes nodded. "Hawthorne orchestrated your abduction, but he's only a middleman, acting on orders from someone higher up." Watson's gaze hardened. "This was about you, wasn't it? They wanted to weaken you." Holmes didn't reply immediately, his expression distant. "Yes," he said finally, "but I have no intention of succumbing to their plan. Rest, Watson. We'll need your mind sharp for what comes next." Despite his exhaustion, Watson's voice carried its usual resolve. "Whatever this is, Holmes, we'll face it together." Holmes allowed himself a faint smile, the first in days. "Indeed, Watson, together." As the morning light brightened the warehouse, Lestrade entered with new information. "We traced the messenger Hawthorne mentioned," he said. "A man matching the description was seen boarding a ship at the docks last night. It's headed for Calais." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then our next move is clear. We followed the trail to Calais." With Watson recovering and a new lead in hand, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, but Holmes knew the mastermind behind his plot was watching, anticipating his every move. The game was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 6: The Trail to Calais. The crisp evening air carried the scent of the Thames as Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade prepared to board a steamer bound for Calais. Watson, though pale and visibly tired, stood firm beside Holmes, his resolute gaze unwavering. Though weakened from his ordeal, his voice carried the same steadiness Holmes had always known. Holmes remained focused, his expression as sharp as ever. He knew the trail they followed might grow colder with every passing hour. Hawthorne's lead had been vague, but it was the only thread they had to unravel this intricate web of deceit. The mention of a messenger fleeing to Calais added another piece to the puzzle, but questions loomed large. What game was their adversary playing? And how did Watson's abduction fit into the larger scheme? The steamer pulled away from the dock, its rhythmic churning a steady backdrop to their quiet tension. Holmes sat in the cabin, his hands steepled beneath his chin. His mind churned as relentlessly as the boat's engine, revisiting every detail: the staged crime scene, the deliberate clues, the taunting note. Each element pointed to a calculating and personal enemy, one who understood his methods too well. Watson, seated across from Holmes, broke the silence. "This feels more personal than anything we've faced before. They didn't just want to deceive you, Holmes, they wanted to rattle you." Holmes's gaze flicked to his friend, the faintest hint of warmth in his voice. They underestimated the bond we share, Watson. Their attempt to weaken me only strengthens my resolve, but they are resourceful, and resourceful adversaries are the most dangerous. By the time they reached Calais, the faint glow of dawn illuminated the French coastline. Waiting for them at the dock was Inspector Dupont, a wiry man with sharp features and an air of efficiency. He wasted no time, leading them to a quiet corner to discuss the situation. A man matching the description of your messenger was seen entering a chateau on the outskirts of the city, Dupont informed them. The property is isolated and guarded, but its activity has been unusual. Carriages arriving at odd hours, no official ownership records. Holmes's interest was piqued. A secluded chateau with hidden dealings aligned perfectly with their investigation. Without hesitation, the group set off toward the location, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The chateau stood imposing against the dimming evening sky. Its stone facade was cold and uninviting, the windows dark save for a faint light in one upper room. Holmes signaled for caution as they approached, his sharp eyes scanning the grounds for any signs of movement. Using his lock-picking tools, Holmes quietly opened a side door, and the group slipped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and stale tobacco. They moved carefully, their footsteps muffled on the stone floor. Holmes's keen senses were attuned to every creak and rustle, his mind piecing together the layout of the building from the faint echoes. As they approached a room at the end of the hall, voices filtered through the thick wooden door. Holmes motioned for silence, listening intently. The conversation was muffled, but the words sedation and keep him hidden caught his attention. His eyes narrowed. Holmes signaled for Lestrade and Dupont to take position. With a sudden burst of movement, he kicked the door open. The room was cluttered with maps and papers, and the occupants leapt to their feet in alarm. Among them was the messenger Hawthorne had described, a wiry man with a scar down his temple. Chaos erupted as the men tried to flee. Lestrade and Dupont acted swiftly, subduing the occupants while Watson, revolver in hand, held his ground with practiced calm. Holmes strode toward the messenger, his tone icy and commanding. "The game is over. Tell me who orchestrated this." The man's defiance faltered under Holmes's unrelenting gaze. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "This is only the beginning. She's planned everything." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Who is she?" The messenger hesitated before muttering, "La Dame Rouge, the Red Lady. She knows you, Holmes. She studied you." The words sent a chill through the room. Holmes straightened, his mind racing. The name was unfamiliar, but the implications were clear. Whoever this Red Lady was, she had orchestrated Watson's abduction with precision, and she understood Holmes's strengths and weaknesses. As Lestrade and Dupont secured the remaining men and confiscated the documents, Holmes turned to Watson. Their eyes met, and in that moment, an unspoken resolve passed between them. The game had entered a new phase, and their adversary was unlike any they had faced before. With the chateau cleared and new leads in hand, Holmes stood at the edge of the property, his silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. "La Dame Rouge," he murmured to himself. "Whoever you are, you've miscalculated. The game is far from over." Chapter 7: The Red Lady's Gambit. The documents confiscated from the chateau revealed a sophisticated network of operations. Maps of London, detailed notes on Holmes's habits, and a disturbing level of knowledge about Watson were scattered across the pages. But among the mess of papers, one stood out, a single red envelope embossed with a serpent entwined around a crescent moon. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mr. Holmes, you play the game well, but every move you make brings you closer to checkmate. Come to Chateau de Rouge if you seek answers. Alone. La Dame Rouge." Holmes read the note aloud, his voice steady but with an edge of intrigue. Watson, still pale but determined, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The absence of Watson, his steadfast companion, was a void Holmes had not anticipated. For the first time in years, he felt an ache of vulnerability creeping into his thoughts. He reached for his violin, drawing the bow across the strings in slow, mournful strokes. The music filled the room, a balm for his restless mind, as he replayed the details of the case. Somewhere within the tangled threads of this deception lay the truth. He only needed to find it. By the time the fire had burned low and the room was cloaked in shadows, Holmes had resolved his course of action. Whoever had orchestrated this crime had underestimated him. They sought to unnerve him, but they had only ignited his relentless determination. "Watson," he murmured to the silence, Wherever you are, I will find you. And whoever dared to play this game will regret it. Chapter 3. Tracing Watson's Footsteps. The morning after the grim discovery at Hyde Park, Holmes threw himself into action with his characteristic intensity. The quiet stillness of 221B Baker Street was broken by the scratch of his pen against paper and the occasional sharp rustle of maps and documents as he pieced together every fragment of information he could gather. Inspector Lestrade arrived promptly, carrying updates from his officers. "We've traced a few witnesses, Holmes," he began, placing his notes on the table. "Two shopkeepers confirmed seeing Watson yesterday morning. He visited a tobacconist on Bond Street and then stopped at a nearby apothecary. After that, nothing." Holmes nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the notes. "Watson frequented both places. Nothing unusual there. What about his route after the apothecary?" Lestrade frowned. "That's where the trail goes cold. No one saw him leave. It's as if he vanished." Holmes stood abruptly and began pacing the room, his mind racing. "Vanished? No, Lestrade, Watson does not vanish. Someone intercepted him. This was planned." He stopped suddenly, turning to face Lestrade. "Did the apothecary notice anything unusual about Watson's demeanor?" Lestrade flipped through his notes. The clerk mentioned that Watson seemed in a hurry, as though he had somewhere urgent to be. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. Watson would not rush unless he had a reason. What could have prompted such urgency?" He moved to his desk and began writing quickly. "I need a list of recent patients at the apothecary. It's possible Watson was there on behalf of someone else. Meanwhile, have your men search the route between Bond Street and the park. Any side streets, alleys, or carriages seen lingering must be investigated." Lestrade nodded, impressed by Holmes's precision. "And the body from Hyde Park? St. Bartholomew's should have more details by now." "Indeed," Holmes replied, grabbing his coat and hat. "We'll head there immediately. The victim's identity will tell us more about the perpetrator, and by extension, their motive." The ride to St. Bartholomew's was brisk, Holmes barely acknowledging Lestrade's presence as his mind whirled with possibilities. At the hospital, they were met by Dr. Stamford, the medical examiner. "The victim," Stamford began, leading them to the examination room, "was indeed dressed in Dr. Watson's clothing, but we've identified him as Henry Cartwright, a local clerk. Cause of death was a single incision to the carotid artery, clean and professional." Holmes frowned. "Cartwright? Was he connected to Watson in any way?" "None that we could find," Stamford replied. "But there was something odd. The blood splatter patterns on the clothing don't align with the wound." Holmes's eyes lit with recognition. "The body was dressed post-mortem. Someone planted the clothes to mislead us." Stamford nodded. "Precisely." Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over the new findings. "Lestrade, whoever orchestrated this is meticulous but has overplayed their hand. By leaving Watson's clothes, they wanted me to believe he was dead. But this game isn't over. Watson is alive, and I will find him." The case had taken a new turn, and Holmes felt the faintest flicker of hope amidst the growing shadows. Chapter 4. The First Clue. Sherlock Holmes spent the hours following his return from St. Bartholomew's in a state of intense focus. The revelation that the victim had been deliberately staged to resemble Dr. John Watson confirmed what Holmes had suspected all along. Watson was alive, but his disappearance was part of an elaborate scheme. The question remained, who was behind it, and why? Holmes sat at his desk, scrutinizing the list of patients recently served by the apothecary Watson had visited before vanishing. It was a mundane catalogue of names, but one stood out: Jonathan Hawthorne. A quick search through Holmes's archive revealed a name belonged to a man with ties to London's murky underworld, a former surgeon turned smuggler known for his discreet services to less than reputable clients. Lestrade arrived shortly after, his presence signaled by the hurried knock and creak of the door. "We've searched the route Watson took after the apothecary," he reported. "Nothing definitive, but one witness mentioned seeing a dark carriage waiting outside for some time before leaving in a rush." Holmes looked up, his expression sharpening. "A carriage? Did the witness note any distinguishing features?" Lestrade frowned. "They said it was plain, nothing remarkable, but they did notice the driver had a scar running along his left cheek." "A scar," Holmes murmured, standing abruptly. "That narrows it down significantly. Jonathan Hawthorne's associate, Georges Carr's Merrick, fits that description perfectly. Hawthorne must have intercepted Watson." Lestrade leaned forward, his tone skeptical. Hawthorne? Are you certain? Holmes gave him a sharp look. Hawthorne has the connections, the resources, and the skill to stage a crime scene as meticulous as the one in Hyde Park. If he's involved, we've taken the first step toward unraveling this conspiracy. Wasting no time, Holmes and Lestrade set out to track Hawthorne. They knew his preferred haunts, places where the desperate sought illegal remedies, and criminals nursed their wounds in secrecy. Their search led them to a shadowy tavern on the outskirts of East London, a place known to harbor Hawthorne's associates. Inside, the dimly lit room reeked of smoke and stale ale. Holmes and Lestrade moved with purpose, their presence drawing cautious glances from the unsavory patrons. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the room, quickly identifying Merrick seated in a corner, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Merrick," Lestrade said, stepping forward with authority, "we need to have a word." Merrick's scarred face twisted into a sneer. "I don't talk to coppers." Holmes, calm but menacing, leaned in. "You'll talk to me. You were seen driving a carriage near Bond Street yesterday morning. Where did you take Watson?" Merrick's sneer faltered, and his eyes darted nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." Holmes's voice turned cold. "You do, and unless you want me to inform your employer of your loose lips, or Lestrade to arrest you for aiding in a kidnapping, you'll answer me." Merrick hesitated, then muttered, "Hawthorne hired me to move a man. Said he was important. Took him to a warehouse near the docks." Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable. "The exact location?" Merrick gave them the address, clearly eager to be rid of them. Holmes exchanged a glance with Lestrade. "We move now." The journey to the docks was tense. The evening fog rolled in thick, shrouding the streets in a veil of mystery. When they arrived, the warehouse stood dark and foreboding, its windows shuttered and doors reinforced. Holmes approached cautiously, signaling Lestrade to keep his men at the ready. Using his lock-picking tools, Holmes quietly opened a side door. The interior was dimly lit, crates stacked haphazardly along the walls. Voices echoed from deeper within the building. Holmes motioned for silence as they moved closer, the shadows concealing their approach. Through a crack in the wall, Holmes spotted Hawthorne. He was speaking to another man, his tone authoritative. "Keep him sedated. The longer he's out of the picture, the better." Holmes's breath caught. "Watson," Holmes signaled Lestrade, who gestured for his officers to position themselves. When all was ready, Holmes pushed the door open, his voice ringing out, "Jonathan Hawthorne, you're under arrest." The scene erupted into chaos. Hawthorne bolted, but Holmes was faster, intercepting him with a forceful grip. Lestrade's men subdued the others, and within moments, the warehouse was under control. Holmes's attention turned immediately to a small room at the back of the warehouse. Pushing the door open, he found a cot where Watson lay, pale but breathing. Relief flooded through him, though he remained outwardly composed. "Watson," he murmured, kneeling beside his friend, "you're safe now." Though Watson did not stir, Holmes knew this was only the beginning of uncovering the truth. As the fog outside thickened, Holmes's resolve hardened. Hawthorne was merely a pawn. The mastermind behind the scheme remained hidden, and Holmes would not rest until they were exposed. Chapter 5: The Awakening. The dim light of dawn filtered through the warehouse's grimy windows as Sherlock Holmes stood over the cot where Dr. John Watson lay unconscious. Watson's face was pale, his breathing shallow but steady. Relief washed over Holmes, but it was fleeting. Questions loomed, demanding answers. Lestrade entered the room, his expression